Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 3 Part 2. So this video is part of a series of videos where I review every movie of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In this video I will cover the last bit of movies I have yet to cover. This is the second half of Phase 3. So, Phase 1 and Phase 2 each had 6 movies, so I covered them each in one video, but Phase 3 has 11 movies, so I elected to split those up into 2 videos. You can check out my last video I did where I covered the first 6 movies of Phase 3. In this video, I will cover the last 5 movies of Phase 3. So, what's the normal format of these videos is that I talk about what I remember about seeing the movie from when I saw it before, and then I go watch the movie and I come back and I give my thoughts after having just watched that. Now with this batch of movies, of course these are the most recent movies, so I'm just going to stick to the format just to be consistent, but really these movies came out within the last couple of years, so I've seen them. My memory of them is not going to be much different than how I feel about them after rewatching, or maybe we'll see. So let me just get into the first movie, or actually I'll talk about a little bit about the second half of Phase 3, because I really do think this should have been considered two different phases, although I don't really get what the deal with the phases are anyway. But I think these next 5 movies I'm going to get into, they mainly starts with Infinity War and mainly either deals with Infinity War or the consequences, or is just like filler in between Infinity War. So yeah, so this section deals with the Thanos snap and all that sort of jazz. Anyway, yeah, let me just jump into the first movie, which is Avengers Infinity War. And from memory, this is one actually I might rethink it after I just watched it, because I've seen this movie twice. First time I saw it, I liked it, but I had a huge issue with the ending being such a huge cliffhanger. But now that I have seen the resolution, that actually doesn't bother me as much as it did before. I remember when this movie first came out, I'm like, while I was watching it, I was thinking, because I was really impressed, because my biggest worry coming into this film, because they're bringing like all these, like a ridiculous amount of characters into one film, unprecedented, even way more than the Avengers. So my first worry was that it's going to feel bloated and there's no way they're going to be able to service all these characters, and I was actually extremely impressed with how they pulled that off. In fact, it is the most impressive thing to me about the film. Like, granted, some characters didn't get as much play as others. Like, some people thought Captain America was shortchanged, but I think it has many characters as there are in the film. They need to focus on what's important. I think the film did a really good job at doing that. But of course, my huge issue was, while I was watching this film, I kept thinking to myself, like, this better have a somewhat definitive ending, because I knew that this was originally they billed it as Avengers Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2. So I knew that there was another Avengers movie coming that would wrap this up. So I knew this wouldn't be a definitive film ending. I knew that this was Part 1 of 2. But I wanted to, throughout watching this film, I was like, I know the ending's not going to be definitive, but I want it to be somewhat definitive. I don't want it to be way too open-ended, and the way it ended was, in my opinion, extremely open-ended. Like, some people said, oh, they thought it had finality to it, but it was, to me, it was a giant cliffhanger, and I was very unhappy with that. You always get the comparisons to Empire Strikes Back, which I think is unfair, because that's the cliffhanger that worked, where this one I don't think it quite does. I think Empire definitely left things open-ended for sure, but it put enough of a bow, enough of a definitive ending on that particular story that I felt satisfied within that it's a standalone movie. Whereas here I think is way too dependent on what happens after the snap, because it leaves it up in a big question mark. It makes you think Thanos won, which obviously he didn't. I mean, all the Spider-Man movie and all this stuff in the works, so that's not how it's going to end. So to me, that just pissed me off. But as I said, in retrospect, after having seen Endgame and seen the conclusion to this, I'm not as bothered by this. But I watched this movie a second time a few months ago. And I liked it a lot less the second time I watched it, because there was and I talked about this, I had some problems with Captain America Civil War. People know me, I have a weird relationship with the Russo brothers, because I loved Winter Soldier, thought it was one of the best movies ever. Civil War, I thought it was a bit too convoluted and a bit too much up his, head up his own ass. And to me, I think Infinity War, I felt that a little bit. Not as much with Civil War, but a little bit like it was a bit too convoluted, and there were certain character interactions I do not buy. And I'll save my rant and raving about Star-Lord until after I rewatch the film to see how I feel about it. But it's not in his character. I'll preamble by saying everyone says, "Oh, it's totally in his character to act like that." No, it's not. There's no way, shape, or form that I buy what he does there. And a lot of people were like, there were petitions online saying, oh, they hate Star-Lord, and oh, Star-Lord's an asshole now because of this. But I don't have a problem with Star-Lord. I have a problem with the fucking writers who did this contrived bullshit writing, which I do not buy. But anyway, I'll save my discussion on that if you don't know what I'm talking about. But, also, the other thing is Thanos. I think everyone, like all the YouTube channels I watch are all like comic book geeks and nerds, and they're way more into the MCU and comic books in general than I am. I'm more of a sci-fi, Star Trek, Expanse, Game of Thrones type guy. Although obviously I do enjoy the Marvel movies, but it's not my wheelhouse, whereas a lot of these YouTube channels I watch, like Screen Junkies, Collider, what have you, that is their main concern. That is their wheelhouse. That is what they're the biggest fans of. And they all went cuckoo crazy over this movie. And also, in particular, Thanos saying that they thought he was one of the best villains ever. I don't like Thanos. And that was my take why I didn't like this movie as much the second time I watched it. Is the main reason I didn't find him a very convincing character. I think they were trying hard to flesh his character out to make him believable, but I never really bought it. He always just came off as a big purple CGI monster villain to me. I mean, his motivation about wanting to half the population so there's more resources for everyone. Like, it's ridiculous how many movies and shows recently had a villain with that motivation. It's a cliche motivation. So I don't think it fleshes him out, and I don't really buy his reasoning there. And plus there's a lot of like faceless like CGI armies in this film. But anyway, let me go watch it now, and I'll get back to you, and I'll see if how I feel about it the third time watching it, if I like it even less, or maybe if I change my mind a bit from when I've seen it before. Alright, so I'm back from watching Infinity War, and yeah, you gotta be honest, I did like it even less the third time. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a good movie, I still really like it, I still stand by the character interactions, although watching it again, I do see that actually some characters do get shortchanged, such as Captain America, Scarlet Witch, and Black Widow, and all of them. But, that's kind of necessary. I think they do really well service Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy and Iron Man and Peter Parker and all of them. But overall, I do think that they did do a really good job with handling that many characters. I stand by, I'm still really impressed with that. Although I will say characters like Scarlet Witch and Vision, I think, aren't they're victims of the whole franchise kind of shortchanging them. I never really got a grasp on who these characters are, and I never really bought their romance or that invested in it. So then that big scene at the end where she has to kill him, like, wasn't quite as powerful as it could have been, because I think like these characters they were really haphazardly introduced in Age of Ultron, which I already covered, and you didn't really see much more development of them beyond that. So I'm really looking forward to the TV show WandaVision, which looks really weird. I'm actually really looking forward to that. But anyway, as far as this movie goes, yeah, I do have like... Now, the issues I have with this film aren't as annoying and numerous as they are with Civil War, but still, like, Civil War, as I said, like, I enjoyed the bulk of the film. It was only towards the end where they completely ruined it. Where here, it's not so much, there's not as much, like, the plot holes are littered throughout the film. Now, here's the thing with plot holes, and I'm sure a lot of people would say this, is that you can nitpick and find plot holes in any movie. Any movie you can find a lot of logical flaws and whatnot. But I think some people say that to mean like whenever people bring up logistical flaws in logic, then it's meaningless because every film has them, and that's simply not true. I mean, while it's true every film has them, it's all a matter of a degree. And I suppose in some ways, it's also a matter of opinion. Like, how much do these flaws in logic bother you? Because there's certain movies, I can't think of any at the top of my head, but there's certain movies or shows that had really undeniable logic flaws. And I'll just go right out and say, I don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me because it tells a good story, so I don't give a shit. Whereas with this film, I do care. It does it affects my enjoyment of the film. And I think, and again, it's not because there's plot holes or flaws or logic or whatever. And a lot of times I do think people are being nitpicky more, especially like some of the technical nitpicks. But to me, why this actively interferes with this film is because the flaws are in the advancement of the plot. And by what is plot? Plot is the order of events and what happens. And a lot of things that happen are like flaws. So they build off, so that's what builds off of other events. And these events are all like based off of other events that shouldn't be happening in the first place because there's flaws or plot holes. And the thing to me is I just think this film has too many of them where I don't think this is a well-structured plot. And I say that about films I love or shows that I love that is well-structured, it all fits together perfectly. This, I think, is a bit of a mess. I gotta be honest. Like, I stand by that. I think the character interactions were amazing, and you get, like, pair-ups like Thor and Rocky Raccoon and stuff like that, and Doctor Strange and Tony Stark. It was interesting that they paired those two up for this film because Doctor Strange is criticized as being another version of Tony Stark, but you see the difference, the stark difference. So I still like the character interactions, and I think that those are still top notch, but the plot not so much. Now, a lot of the issues that I have with the plot let me start with, before I get into the specifics, because I know you're like, what? You keep talking about plot holes, but what are they, Mark? I'll get to them, hold on. But first, let me talk about Thanos, because this is where I think all the issues lie. And I said at the start of my preamble, I wasn't a huge fan of Thanos. I absolutely stand by that. And the main issue I have with him that I didn't mention is that he is the Superman problem. He is the essence of the Superman problem. He's too powerful of a character, too powerful of a villain, and his powers are undefined as well. And so much so where, because I always say, if you have anything fantastical, and this is arguably it's fantasy sci-fi, if you have anything fantastical, fantasy is fine. You can break the laws of reality, laws of nature, as long as you define clearly what your rules are and what how you're defining this fantasy. How does this fantastical elements work in this fictional world? And I don't, with Thanos, I don't have a clear picture of that. It seems that his powers and abilities are whatever the plot requires them to be, and therefore I have no investment on when they're fighting him and people are fighting him to take him down. I have zero investment in it because it seems like, well, he's just going to win if the plot needs him to win, and he's going to lose if the plot needs him to lose, which is bad writing because you're not clearly defining. And plus, he's so invincible on top of that he can't lose. So I have zero investment in him being defeated, and I think that's part of the reason why I hate the ending where he does win, is because it was so telegraphed that he would win that it's not very dynamic storytelling. That's the reason why I hate a couple other films that people love. But for me, I don't know, when they have a character it's like he's gonna win, and he wins, that's not interesting to me. That's just not dynamic storytelling. That's telegraphed. It's boring. Unless you have a good character story within that. And as I talked about in my preamble, I don't think it is a good character story. I think it's a big cliche, and I don't really buy his reasoning. Now, with Thanos in particular, like when he beats Hulk at the start of the film, when he kicks his ass, that's when I start losing interest in this character altogether. Like, he just easily defeats the Hulk, so why do I care? But it gets worse throughout the film when he acquires the Reality Stone. Why, if he has the Reality Stone, why doesn't he just use the Reality Stone? He instantly turned Drax to fluff, and he turned Mantis into a slinky. Why doesn't he? He's unstoppable. He has this Reality Stone that can, and he had this illusion, and he came out of nowhere, and he created this whole reality where the Collector was there when really he's already dead. I mean, he's invincible. He's like Q. This is basically, for a Star Trek analogy, this is like if the Federation and Starfleet went to war with Q. This is basically what it is. It'd be meaningless because they could never win. Q could just... And the Federation's gone. It's impossible. Now, you may be like, the snap, maybe I shouldn't have done that because Q would also snap his fingers. You're like, Mark, he needs all 6 stones and they have the time to stop him. But no, once you have that Reality Stone, it doesn't fucking matter. All you need to do is fucking turn them into slinkies. And make them see illusions that aren't there. Why wasn't he doing that the whole time? So anything that happened after this is there were zero stakes because I knew there was zero chance that the heroes could actually win against him. And so the only way this could have been interesting storytelling, dynamic storytelling, is if the heroes did win. And I know some people think it's very risque, and I thought it was really, dark and out there and taking risks to have the ending where the heroes lose. But just the way, if you look at it from a Marvel perspective and the MCU perspective, sure. But if you look at it just this film alone, a standalone piece, then actually, no, it's not risky if it was telegraphed. It was there the whole time. It would have been risque if the heroes did win. That would have been unexpected. That would have been... Also, I would have called bullshit on that, by the way. It wouldn't have worked if the heroes won, because especially after what they showed with the Reality Stone. Once they showed that, if the heroes did win, it would be contrived. And if they didn't win, it would be telegraphed. So it's kind of a lose-lose. To me, Thanos was kicking Hulk's ass at the start was bad enough. But once he got that Reality Stone and instantly turned Drax into a slinky, then why do I... That to me, that was the death knell of the movie. Why do I care? Because it's impossible for him to lose. He has... And so throughout the rest of the movie, when he's fighting Doctor Strange or when he's fighting Spider-Man, why is he bothering? With all this bullshit, why doesn't he use the Reality Stone and turn them into slinkies? Or fucking disappear or teleport or something? Yeah. And so I don't actually buy when Thor kills him at the end or throws a hammer down at him, because why didn't he use his reality stone to make him invisible? I don't know. It makes him too powerful. Therefore, he's not interesting, and I had zero interest in the stakes. So, to be honest, I do find most of the fight scenes in this film boring. There's not as investment in the fight scenes as, say, the first Avengers movie, which I was a lot of investment, even though that was also a nameless, army with the sky beam alien armies going around fighting. But I had more investment in the characters because I felt the stakes. I felt like our heroes could win, and I could see what was at risk. But here, you have an invincible, unstoppable, Q-like omniscient being. So there's no stakes. There's no chance of winning. Therefore, I have no investment. And also, okay, so let me get into some of those plot holes that I'm talking about. Because, well, first of all, yeah, I've already, the omniscient thing is one of them. But also, events, seem to happen, characters seem to do things to save other people's lives. And I guess that's a theme of the film. Because they had the whole thing with Vision and Cap saying we don't trade lives. And I think they're trying to make that a theme. But I think it's unsuccessful. Because I don't really buy, for example, Gamora telling Thanos where to find the stone to save Nebula, if Nebula's going to die anyway if Thanos gets the stone. Alright, so Doctor Strange giving the stone to Thanos, of course, that opens up a whole nother can of worms, a whole nother rabbit hole, which I guess I'll jump down now, because of course the huge fan explanation, or not fan, but actual explanation for that is that Doctor Strange used the time stone to see all those possible futures, and he saw millions of them, and he said there was only one in which they win. So the reason he gave Thanos the time stone is because that's what needed to happen in order for them to win. And as we see in Endgame, Tony Stark is integral in defeating Thanos, so he needs to still be alive, which is why Doctor Strange couldn't let him die. And also what he did by giving Thanos a time stone set things in motion for his eventual defeat. Problem with that is that I don't buy that, not for a single second. I don't know if you guys watch this. There's this YouTube thing called pitch meetings they do on this channel Screen Rant, where the guy films himself being the guy pitching a movie and a producer, and he did one for Endgame, which I always remember. So I really love that channel. I'd recommend it. Why do I like it? Unclear. Maybe because it's super easy, barely an inconvenience. Anyway, the one he did for Endgame is something that really struck with me. Is when he said, are people going to point out flaws in the plot holes and things that didn't make sense? So I wrote something in the script called Shut the Hell Up. And the producer was like, oh, what's that? He was like, I'm going to have Doctor Strange say he looked at all these different possible futures, and he saw only one would work. So every time someone points out a way they could have won or something, we could point them back to that thing where Doctor Strange said there's only one way they could win. And the producer's like, yeah, shut the hell up. That's basically it. I think that hits the nail on the head. That's they're just using this as an excuse. But first of all, I do not buy for a single solitary second that there's only one possible future in which they could win. So let me count the ways. Alright, I'll get the Star-Lord good time, don't you worry. But let me count some of the ways in which, well, the first way I want to count does involve Star-Lord, but just regardless, let's leave aside the logic and why he starts attacking Thanos. But because at this point, Mantis is on his head, putting him to sleep. And Doctor Strange and Iron Man are holding him in his iron hold, and Spider-Man and Iron Man are really close to getting the glove off, and then Star-Lord freaks out and starts punching him. And when Star-Lord punches him and throws Mantis off and throws off her thing, and he regains himself, Spider-Man is this close, you can see, is this close to getting that glove off. That glove is virtually off when Star-Lord does it. So you're telling me, and millions of possible futures, there's no future where Star-Lord waits 2 seconds or half a second later to start attacking Thanos, by which time Spider-Man has the glove off and they win. You're telling me that out of millions of possible futures, there's just like a split second of a difference. Doesn't happen. Not to mention the fact that Star-Lord shouldn't react that way in the first place, but I'll get to that shortly. But still, bullshit. Also, we see at the first fight in New York City how Doctor Strange and Wong open up these portals, and they had the one big giant alien with a huge axe chasing after him, and they put him in the portal and they take him like to this weird place in the snow. He tries to jump through the portal, they close it on him, shut it on his hand, and his hand cups off. Why the fuck didn't Doctor Strange do that to Thanos? I mean, you can't say, oh, he couldn't. Why not? Oh, he didn't even try. Like, Thanos would have outsmarted him. Bullshit. There's no way Thanos would have been able to fight against that. If you open up a portal and close it on his hand, how's Thanos going to do jack shit about it? Especially if you have him in that fucking hold that the Manus had him in. Instead of doing the thing and pulling the glove, why not just take the portal and slice off his fucking hand? There you go. Infinity Stone's gone. His power is gone. And so as much as I was talking about Thanos being invincible, unstoppable, I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit, because there are actually ways they showed that they could have defeated him, and that's actually even more maddening, more frustrating, especially when they throw in that bullshit about, oh, there's only one possible way we could win in the events of Endgame, which were very convoluted and take place 5 years later. Is the only possible outcome? Really? There's no possible outcome when they could use the portal to slice his hand off? There's no possible outcome where Thor would have threw the Stormbreaker at his head or sliced off his glove instead of hitting him in the heart? There's no possible, out of millions of possibility futures, there's none of them that would have happened. Bullshit! Bullshit! It was in fact way too easy to defeat Thanos, and I don't buy that out of millions of possible futures, the only possible way they could win is this really long, convoluted 5-year later plan that happens in Endgame. I don't buy that. Really throws me out of this world as well. Now, since I brought up Star-Lord, I understand people's reasoning on this, but I think they're dead wrong. Because and it's funny because to me this is exactly the same argument I made for Civil War when Iron Man attacks Captain America and Bucky because he's shown a footage of Bucky killing his parents, even though he knows for a fact that Bucky was brainwashed, but he still tries to kill his best friend in order to kill the guy who was just brainwashed into killing his parents, which to me makes no sense. I already talked about this in my Civil War review. It's like trying to attack this specific knife that was used to kill your parents instead of the person who wielded the knife. It makes zero sense. And in fact, being willing to kill your best friend in order to get to that knife makes no sense. To me, this is the exact same flawed logic here with Star. Because, as I said, in that Civil War, Tony Stark, he wasn't being an asshole. He wasn't being, blind or I don't hate Tony Stark. I just think that's contrived writing, and I don't buy that anybody who has any sense of intelligence or sanity, which Tony Stark was shown to have an abundance of both, would behave that way. So it's just writing. It's unbelievable, as I do not believe this would happen. It's bad writing, and it's the same thing here with Star-Lord. Now, I know the thing with Star-Lord is people say, oh, but he's been shown to be very impulsive, and he loses his temper, and yes, very true. But he is still rational, intelligent, and he knows the difference between helping and hurting someone. Of course he would lose his temper, and it's totally within his character for him to lose his temper, but it's not within his character to lose the sense of reality, to understand the difference between hurting and helping someone. And I think this is the most ridiculous. And the fact that it boggles my mind how there's some people who agree with me on the Tony Stark thing but disagree with me here. To me, it's the same situation. I don't see why you could see one thing but not the other. It's the same goddamn thing. Is that he knows the Mantis is there, has him in hold. He has his Thanos is like, ooh, back, and they're like trying to get the gloves off. So he knows as soon as that glove comes off, Thanos dead. So he finds out that Gamora is dead. So so he punches Thanos and knocks Mantis off. No, bullshit. What he would do is he would be like, give me that glove. Help me get the glove. I'm going to take that glove off so I can kill him. His goal is to hurt Thanos, right? And what's the best way to hurt Thanos? Kill him. What's the only way to kill him? By getting the glove off. So he would get the glove off. Don't give me that bullshit. And especially like the way Tony and everyone were like, oh, Star-Lord, calm down, hold up. We're still trying to get him. Of course he's going to be like, okay, you're right. I want to help you get him because I want to kill this motherfucker. Because he lost his temper. Don't give me this bullshit that he completely loses any sense of rational thought or reality. He doesn't know the difference between hurting and helping someone. He doesn't understand that he's actually helping Thanos by punching him. He would fucking understand that. He's grief-stricken, he's impulsive. I don't give a fuck. It doesn't matter how grief-stricken or impulsive someone is. They can still tell the difference between hurting someone and helping someone. I'm sorry, but they can. So that thing, to me, this is also unbelievable bullshit bad writing, which I think is just as bad as the thing in Civil War. And I don't buy it for a second. I think it's crazy that people defend this. There's people online who are saying, oh, I hate Star-Lord. I don't hate Star-Lord. I just hate the writer because I don't believe he would be... No one with any sanity and intelligence would behave like this. No one. But anyway... tabling that. Let's table this for a second. Even if, you're wrong and you disagree with me, that's fine if you want to be wrong. But let's table this for a second and say that Star-Lord would behave this way. Why didn't Iron Man, when he sees Star-Lord was starting to freak out, why didn't Iron Man, tackle him or throw one of his things to put his things so he wouldn't attack Thanos? It'd only take, 2 seconds. Because, as I said, that glove was 2 seconds from being off. All you need to do is restrain him for 2... And Iron Man shoots all this shit. He has all these gadgets that come out of nowhere. He can go like this, restrain him for 2 seconds. That's all you fucking need. But out of millions of possibilities, there's only one word: bullshit. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I guess... those mainly the plot holes that I was referring to. It's just how easy, first of all, how invincible Thanos is, and on the flip side, how easily they could have defeated him. And I don't buy the screenwriter trying to be like, shut the hell up, there's only one way out of millions. Bullshit. That is what we call bullshit. Anyway, so... regardless, also on top of that, I was kind of frustrated with the fact that we spent this whole storyline with Thor and Peter Dinklage trying to reignite the star and create Stormbreaker, and then it amounts to basically a fake out where Thor throws the hammer and he thinks he wins, but it doesn't win, and Thanos wins anyway. That really pissed me off. Although I will say I liked what they did with this in Endgame. So, and all signs point that they had this planned out. So, I guess I can give it some leeway for that. But yeah. Anyway, getting back to the ending. I actually, in my preamble, said that I thought didn't mind the ending as much since Endgame. But watching the ending again, I realized that's not actually true. Because I remember when I first saw this movie, I said that the ending felt really gimmicky to me. And watching this movie again, that really struck me as absolutely true. It does seem really... Even though I know what they do in Endgame, I think just the contrived way in which they get to this ending, like Doctor Strange saying there's only 1 out of 1,000,000 chances, and all these chances where they could have easily defeated Thanos, but it didn't actually happen. In order to get to this ending, it felt really gimmicky. It felt like a gimmick. It felt, and I talked about this when I talked about like Walking Dead finale, that really terrible one. I think it was season 5 or whatever. Is that I feel like I'm in the car. I'm writing. The driver is the writers, screenwriters, or the filmmakers. They're driving the car, and I'm along for the ride. I'm totally immersed in this world, like I'm in the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is what I'm completely immersed in. And when they do something like that ending, which is gimmicky, it's like they could take, without stopping the car, somebody takes me, chucks me out of the car, and throws me out of the car, so I'm no longer immersed in the universe. I'm suddenly extremely aware that I'm watching a scripted film, and that the screenwriters behind it, and the scriptwriters, and people writing it this way, which is never what you want in a movie. You always want to maintain that immersion in this fictional world. You want to feel like you're in the fictional world, not that there's contrived screenwriters trying to pull different heartstrings and have a gimmick and be like, see, they're all dead. You gotta wait a year to find out who comes back. How did they come back? How did they get out of this one? And to be clear, most cliffhangers aren't like that, like The Empire Strikes Back. That's a good cliffhanger. That didn't feel contrived. I was immersed. I was never thrown out of the car. I was in that car the whole time. And I was totally willing to see where we went. Here, not as interested. Although, to be fair, I was still dying to find out what they would do. Just because, it's not a terrible movie. I don't, as much as I sort of bash this film so far, I don't hate it. I want to specify that. But anyway, I'm going to give my rating for Avengers Infinity War, and before I give this a 7, I'm actually going to drop this to a 6, good. Because it's a still overall positive rating. I still enjoyed the film. As I said, the character interactions were really well done. The dialogue was on par. I love seeing Doctor Strange and Peter Parker and them intermix, and like the stakes are high with Wakanda. It really got your chest thumping. You want to find out what happens. Issue is that Thanos was not a well-constructed villain. His motivations I didn't really buy. He was too invincible, and they didn't set the rules on how he could have been defeated. Therefore, I had zero investment or stakes involved in all the fight scenes. And on top of that, they had a lot of contrivance, plot holes in order to get to where the plot ends, where it doesn't feel earned, it feels gimmicky. Anyway... I know everyone's going to disagree with me on this one, but I'll talk more about this when we get to Endgame, because I want to get to Endgame now, but unfortunately there's 2 movies I have to get through first before I get to Endgame, because to be clear, I love Endgame. I'll talk about that more when I get to it, but there's some people who say Infinity War is better, and boy howdy, I could not disagree with that more. But anyway, not there yet. Let me get to the next film, which is Ant-Man and Wasp, which... kind of even don't want to watch, and because it's such a low stakes film compared to Infinity War. It's weird that this is in between Infinity War and Endgame, and you can really tell this is Marvel sort of spinning its wheels, because they have 2 movies, of course, in between them, and both of them, Ant-Man and Wasp takes place concurrently with Infinity Wars, and then Captain Marvel is a prequel, so therefore they can procrastinate because they want for you to wait a year to get a resolution to the cliffhanger. And Ant-Man and Wasp was a worthy follow-up to the Ant-Man film, I believe. I think they do the action sequences, I think, are better from memory, and they do a lot more with the growing big and growing small, but the plot is not as well structured. It's a bit messier from memory, and not a clear-cut case. I do remember the villain being kind of sympathetic and believable, but I remember this film being, a bit of a messy plot, kind of all over the place. It was, so mostly I just remember it being okay. I think I remember liking the first Ant-Man better than this one. So anyway, I'm going to go watch Ant-Man and the Wasp and get back with some of my feelings on that film. Alright, Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, I just watched it, and I actually did like it better. I actually do think now that this is a better movie than the first Ant-Man. I have changed my mind on that. I didn't remember it very well, and I still don't think it's like a great movie, but a lot about it works. Like I said in the preamble that I thought it was a bit messy, but it wasn't really, actually, not more so than most Marvel movies. It actually has a pretty well structured, put together plot. The only thing that was messy and out of place, and the thing I was specifically thinking of when I said that, was the Walter Goggins character, the gangster or the arms dealer, or whoever he was. He was totally unnecessary, and he was kind of just a waste of time. And he showed up for that final chase sequence. It did make it feel a bit Benny Hillish having him there. It's like, oh, I got the lab. No, he has the lab. No, she has the lab. No, who's got the lab now? That was a bit, I don't know. But, I mean, that feeling does work because it's a comedy. It's a very effective comedy. But I just think that his character overall was just, if you take him out, the story would have been tighter and better. Like, you don't need him there. I don't know why they felt the need to put his character in there. Nothing been against Walter Goggins. He's a good actor, but that character was just didn't need to exist. Really, it was just there to sort of, I guess, to ramp up tension, where I don't really think you need that, I suppose. I suppose that they didn't have enough to do with Ghost, but I think they could have kept it down a bit, and the movie would have felt tighter, better. But looking back on this, I actually think it's better than the first Ant-Man, because the first Ant-Man was it was very formulaic in its structure. It was very much taking from Iron Man and was a bit too reminiscent of the first Iron Man movie, and it was your plain cliche by the numbers plot, where this one I think was more complex, and maybe that's what threw me at the first, but there's also, the characters are more developed, and there's more emotional investment. I mean, that was Scott Lang. Scott Lang, I think, was always well developed, particularly in the first one. In this one, he's just as well developed, and you're just as invested in this character. But of course, I think this movie does a much better job at the villain. I think that is definitely its strength, and I actually do think that Ghost is probably one of the better villains of the MCU, because she is someone, and I might even go as far to say that they pulled her off better than Killmonger. Because Killmonger you could relate to him, and you could see his point of view, but I think he wasn't really as well developed. Like, some of his actions didn't really jive with his motivations or his personality, so I couldn't really get a strong fix on who that character was. Whereas with Ghost, could get a really strong fix on who she was, who her personality was, and what her motivation was. So I think she was better well developed, and you could totally see her point of view, that she was in pain and she's basically trying to save her own life. And I love how because a lot of, particularly comic book movies, instinct would be to take this over the top, and they could have a villain whose life is in danger, but they would take it over the top and have the villain like be willing to torture and kill people and do all this nasty shit and not care because I'm gonna die anyway because I'm evil. But they didn't do that. Like, they did it enough where I could buy it, like the fact that she didn't care about killing what's her face, Michelle Pfeiffer, because she's just a concept, really. They don't even know if she's actually alive or she could be brought back to life. And they don't even know if what she's going to do will kill her. So I totally bought that. And I could buy her getting frustrated with Scott and, Hope and all of them, and Hank trying to thwart her plans and constantly stopping her, to the point where she would be like, all right, well, the only way I can do is I had to threaten Scott Lang's daughter. And I like how they had the Lawrence Fishburne character who's like, no, if you do that, I'm not going to help you. And so I think I think that was a very strong duo. Like she was on top of that, she was really effectively menacing as a villain. Like when she showed up, it was like an unstoppable villain, one that I could actually buy, unlike Thanos, was one who wasn't too unstoppable, but one that was unstoppable enough to be menacing, to be really, like, when she showed up, it was generally like intense, scary. It's like, holy fuck, we gotta get the hell out of here, because she's pretty much unstoppable. She can unphase and stuff, yet she was vulnerable at the same time, something that Thanos wasn't, which to me makes me a more interesting, more dynamic villain, the fact that she was dying. So I think they actually hit that chord perfect, and so I would say, yeah, I would say it's a better film. Now, the comedy, I think, might have worked a bit better in the first film, but it worked well enough here. And so many other things worked better, like the villain, the characters, and the action. As I said in the preamble, like, their use of things getting bigger and smaller was a lot more sort of creative here, particularly that final chase scene, with the cars, and they're throwing the Pez and it gets huge, and then the cars like blow up and underneath another car, and it just flips the car over, and then you have the giant man with the ferry. Like, all that was, I think, really taking full advantage of the premise of Ant-Man, and more so than the first movie did. And so I think it really worked and really gelled. To have a really invested plot. Now, there are some plot holes, of course, like, how does Michelle Pfeiffer live for 30 years? What does she eat, sleep, and poop in this weird, would it almost made more sense if they said that she had, like, was kind of interphasic or out of phase, or just time traveled through the 30 years or whatever, which is what they ended up doing with Scott in this missing 5 years, in Endgame, and I'll get to Endgame. Yeah, but I don't care. That's a plot hole I don't care about, because it doesn't really bother me that much, because the rest of the movie, it works, and I buy, I like how Hank and Hope were like, hate Scott at the start of the film, I think, and I also like how they play off of his, getting, like, being under house arrest for what he did in Captain America Civil War. Now, I do think his motivation for helping Captain America is really put to the test in this film, and I don't think it holds up, because I think that was kind of rushed through in Civil War. There was just like, oh, I know a guy, and the Falcon calls Ant-Man. It's like, oh, you're Captain, oh, I love you, Captain America, I'll help you. And it doesn't actually fit to Scott Lang's character as described in the first film, because he was the ex-con who didn't want to do anything to jeopardize his relationship with his daughter. So it is really out of place that he would go off to Germany to help. So that's more of a problem with Civil War. As I said, there's enough problems with Captain America Civil War. But anyway, yeah, so, I mean, this film, again, it was more like an aside, though. It wasn't a grand epic comic book film, and it didn't impress me as much as, say, something like Spider-Man Homecoming or Thor Ragnarok, but it was a bit more silly and quiet based, and as I said, the whole character with oh yeah, also, like, I mentioned Walter Goggins' character being unnecessary, but then the character of, like, the FBI agent who was in charge of Scott Lang's house arrest, he was over the top silly. Like, I didn't buy him as a real person, and I didn't particularly think he was funny. Just the way he was, like, really goofy and, like, oh, can you teach me the card trick? And I just thought that was cheap humor. So not everything about this film works, which is why I don't think it's like a masterpiece or anything. But watching it again, I think is a solid entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it's, as I said, it has a strong base with the characters, a strong base with the villain. The through story was well structured, other than the Walter Goggins part, which is unnecessary, but the rest of it was well structured. And of course, you get the post-credit scene where that feeds into, Infinity War and Endgame, and that was like that was an effective, nice little cliffhanger there to sort of Easter eggs to sort of build off of the Infinity War, and it really sets up. It sets up actually Scott Lang, like Ant-Man ends up being very important in Endgame, and it sort of sets that up nicely for it. So of course that was cool as well. And I do like the thing with the ant playing the drum. And it's not worth sitting through like 10 minutes of credits for, but if you can fast forward to get to it, it's, I don't know, I think that it's a funny little Easter egg. Just mainly like during the film, having that giant ant like do Scott Lang's daily routine, so he's in the bathtub. Like, I don't know, I just think that was funny. So anyway, my rating for Ant-Man and Wasp out of 10 is a 8. Extremely good. I think this was a very solid film. Not a masterpiece by anyone's reckoning, but it's definitely a lot better than I remember it being, than I remember giving it credit for. So, and it's also interesting to put it into context after watching all the MCU movies in a row like I'm doing, and I can see this is actually one of the stronger ones. So there you go. So, I'll get into the next movie, which is Captain Marvel. Now, this Captain Marvel, I like this movie a lot better than most people, or most critics, I would say. Most people were really lukewarm on this film, and I won't even address the haters because they're not worth addressing. But most like critics and reasonable people would say that this movie was okay, and I have heard several critics say this is one of the weaker MCU movies, which I remember totally disagreeing with. I remember really liking this film. Now, it is going to be interesting watching it after having watched all the other MCU movies, because maybe I'll notice some more flaws. As a prequel, I already know that the Tesseract thing is really out of place and doesn't really fit. And some, the reveal with Nick Fury was stupid. That was obvious to me. But some people thought, see, I love Brie Larson because she was in one of my favorite movies of all time, Room, and I think she's one of the best actresses of all time. And it's so funny, the haters trying to say, oh, she's a bad actress, and they use her shorthand as a bad actress. She won a fucking Oscar, idiots. And she deserved it. Like, her performance in Room was she's one of the best actresses out there. And I think her performance in this film is understated because it's meant to be understated. She's meant to play, and I recall her not nostalgia, I'll get to that, but I recall her in amnesia, that's the word I'm looking for, her amnesia story really working and making and being a good character story. I disagreed with a lot of critics saying, oh, they didn't get a handle on the character. I thought I had a handle on the character. I thought that she had a pretty interesting character story. And nostalgia, the 90s nostalgia, like a lot of critics I heard say was over the top, I don't think there was enough of it. I really don't see how this is over the top. I think there should have been more. There's not enough 90s nostalgia. Everyone's doing 80s nostalgia. And one critic went as far as to say, like, that Stranger Things wasn't as bad as, like, this went way over. No way. You're out of your mind. Stranger Things is way over the top with the nostalgia. Way more. Like, billion times more. Well, maybe not a billion times, but at least 10 times more than this film was. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I wanted more 90s nostalgia. I don't think there was enough on it. Yes, when they played I'm Just a Girl when Captain Marvel was kicking ass is a bit on the nose. I'll agree with that. But most of the other, like, musical choices and whatever, like, if you have a movie set in the 90s, that's a given. I don't see how that's all in your face, and all any of the other references I don't think was all that in your face. It's taking place in the fucking 90s. Of course you can have a 90s internet style. I just don't get the complaints. I just don't get them. Maybe that's because I personally want more 90s nostalgia and I'm sick of 80s nostalgia. Could be part of it. But anyway, I'm going to go watch Captain Marvel, and I'll get back to you with my thoughts after just watching it. Okay, so just got back from watching Captain Marvel, and it's I've turned into a flurkin. Oh, did I turn into a Flurkin? Is that my pet Flurkin? That's my pet Flurkin. Come on, Flurkin, spit up the Tesseract. Spit up the Tesseract. Come on, do it. Spit it up. Sorry. All right. Better be careful that he doesn't scratch my eye out. Oh, god damn it. That was dumb. Anyway, so just got back from watching Captain Marvel, and yeah, I liked it. I think it's good. Maybe, I don't know, maybe just as good as I remember. Maybe not as much. I don't know. Don't know. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought that it was a pretty good character story. I don't think this is one of the best. This definitely isn't a top tier Marvel movie to me, but I think it's pretty solid. I do think it's a solid one. I did like I think it was a well structured plot. It didn't get a bit too crazy, over the top action nonsense, or a little bit towards the end. But for the most part, it was a very clear story. I liked how. I like the story that begins with Carol Danvers, or Veers, not knowing who she was. The whole thing where Danvers is short to Veers reminds me so much of V'ger. But anyway, V'ger, her story about how she was trying to keep her control, and God, what the hell was that guy's name? The dude who was, hold on, I have to look this up. Jan Rog. I would never remember that. Jude Law. The dude who's played by Jude Law. I couldn't even remember his name. But anyway, Jude Law, Young Rog, how he starts off with trying to be his, Captain Marvel's mentor, teacher, saying, oh, you're letting emotions get the better of you, blah, blah, blah. And I like how through the journey that he actually turns out to be the villain, basically, and how she wins in the end. Is like they sort of call back to the scene at the beginning where she's like, oh, you have to defeat me without your powers and prove that you can take me on, and she just shoots him, and it's like, I don't have to prove anything to you. Like, that was I like that character arc, the way they got there. And I think it took her that long to realize, because I hate tough love. I don't think it's a good way to learn, to teach. I particularly hate, hard love or tough love way of teaching. I think I don't know, everyone has different ways of learning, but for me, I absolutely hate it. And I love how this is basically striking against it, because usually when they would have like a mentor and he's being a hard ass on the pupil grows up and appreciates and becomes a hard ass. Like, oh, I appreciate you for being a hard ass. And I love how this film was like, nah, fuck you for being a hard ass. I don't have to listen to you. I got nothing to prove to you. I actually did love that, and I love that I kind of got the idea that the Kree would end up being villains anyway, because Kree were not portrayed very well in Guardians of the Galaxy. That's, I think, if I recall Guardians of the Galaxy, which I've seen recently, is that there was a subsection of Kree that Ronan the Accuser was in charge of, that was going around obliterating planets. And that the Kree in general, like, they had a peace treaty with Xandar, but I think Kree was, the general Kree were, the main government was refusing to do anything about Ronan the Accuser, so they're not good guys. So, kind of knew that going in, so it was weird how the film began with portraying them as the hero team. So this is the hero team, we're the Kree, we're going to go defeat these evil Skrulls. So I kind of had the feeling throughout that something was up, that something wouldn't be right. And so I love the reveal that the Skrulls are actually the good guys. I think that was a really good twist that really works for the film. Because you are convinced that these Skrulls are villains. They're green, evil looking, and they're taking over people's bodies and impersonating people. And you have a few scenes like that when they're impersonating the old lady, is like looking very sinister. And I think it adds so much dynamic that they're not. That there's more to appear. That is actually the Kree and John Young or whatever, Jude Law, that was lying to her this whole time, and that this supreme intelligence thing is actually like it turned out to be pretty evil, fucked up being that went to like commit genocide on this race, apparently because the race didn't like being conquered by the Kree and rebelled, and so they wanted to wipe them out. And I think the personal character journey that Carol Danvers goes on, discovering who she is, and you have I think it works perfectly, actually, how they have those flashbacks towards the start of the film when the Talos, I think his name is, the alien dude, is looking through her memories. And at first, as the audience, you don't know what's going on. You're sort of in the mindset of Carol Danvers, where you only have pieces, and you don't know the whole thing. You're not sure what's going on. And I think it unfolds in a very interesting way. And I've heard like the opinions saying that the character of Carol Danvers was seemed indifferent the whole time, but I completely disagree. I think she was definitely like was very troubled and struggling to find who she was, and I think it was interesting, and especially meeting her old friend. Gotta look up her name, Maria Rambeau. Yeah, that was a good character in their interactions, and seeing how like that was a good character moment when she finally met her. It's like, I thought you died 6 years ago, and how like affected they were by this. So I think the whole movie is pretty effective. This third act ending is not one of the worst third act endings. There were definitely, most of the movies in Phase 1, like Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, and stuff like that, were like way, way worse. But it's not one of the best third act endings either. It does get a bit crazy, and as I said, I wasn't crazy about the playing No Doubt I'm Just a Girl during the fight scene, but it didn't like totally, I wasn't like, oh, this is so dumb like some people were apparently. Like, I didn't hate it like some people did. I was just like, yeah, it's a bit heavy handed, maybe cut back on that a little bit. Like, it didn't totally bother me, but it's just like, ease back. But other than that, like the ending fight scene, like it had stakes, like because you were worried about Talos, and I loved how they sort of developed him. They portrayed him as this father who's just protecting his family, and I love that turn. I love how you think the villains at first and all, now at the end of the movie, you're sympathizing with him, and you want him to be protected. And I think that's a very good story beat to be able to do that. And I think that they give a lot of weight to the ending. Now, I just talked about with Thanos, I talked about the Superman problem. And a lot of people were talking about the Superman problem when it comes to Captain Marvel. Some people even going as far as to say it's a bit worse than Superman, because Captain Marvel is basically a Superman-esque character with all these powers, and that they're so powerful. In fact, I heard a lot of people complain about this film, saying part of the issue is that she showed no vulnerability, which I think is total and complete nonsense up until maybe like 10-15 minutes before the movie ends. Like, around that time where she finally found her true powers, yeah, she was unstoppable and nothing could stop her, so there were really no up and down her stakes after that. It was just about her kicking ass. But before then, she was very vulnerable, and like right up to the point, like she still thought that Jude Law could take her powers away, and she was very like vulnerable when she was Earth. She had no memory, and so I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Now, the last like 10-15 minutes where she was like super powered going around destroying spaceships, okay. But I think that doesn't bother me, because that's just the last 10-15 minutes of the film. I think there's a common motif that a lot of films do, which I think there's nothing wrong with. I think it's actually effective format, effective storytelling, is that a character throughout the entire film is trying to find themselves, find their true voice, find their powers. And usually if you get talking about like fantasy or sci-fi films, you get to the point where they find their true powers and they become unstoppable. Like, let me throw out a common example. The Matrix. The Matrix is another really great example of this, with Neo, who has these powers. He's the one. He can, like, take down any of the Sentinels, and he can fly like Superman. He's unstoppable. But for the majority of the Matrix, he didn't have that. He didn't know how to use them. He was learning how to find his powers. He was very vulnerable. It wasn't until the last act, the last 10, 15 minutes, that he found his powers and he kicked ass. And I think that's a good format. I think that's exactly what they did here. So I completely disagree that this film has a Superman problem. I totally don't think it does. Infinity War definitely had a Superman problem with Thanos, but this does not, because it's more like a Matrix type journey where you find it at the end. And the Matrix sequels, they found a way to keep Neo interesting, even though he had these super unstoppable powers. So if they do further Captain Marvel movies or use Captain Marvel in the future, they do have to find ways to keep it interesting. And she did appear in Endgame, and I do think they did manage to, because she was going up against Thanos, who was this, Superman as well. So who also has the Superman problem. So they kind of even each other out. But hopefully, if they have Captain Marvel in the future, they'll find a way to make her overcome the Superman problem and make her powers a bit more vulnerable. But to me, that wasn't an issue for this film. It was more like she had to discover her true. She was very vulnerable until she discovered her true powers. But anyway, as far as it being a prequel, like, I looked this up out of curiosity, and I actually I went online, and there's actually having the Tesseract in this doesn't break the timeline. It doesn't break canon. It's kind of an aside that's unnecessary, but it's not contradictory, because Howard Stark got the Tesseract from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean after Captain America crashed the first Avenger, and they were studying at S.H.I.E.L.D., and we saw in Endgame, and the 70s they were still studying it. But that does not preclude the fact that Marvel got a hold of it in the 90s, did some experiments, and then had it in this orbit space station for 6 years, and eventually Nick Fury got it back and gave it back to S.H.I.E.L.D., so S.H.I.E.L.D. have it once again. So that doesn't contradict anything, because S.H.I.E.L.D. had it, and then it wouldn't, for a short amount of time, Marvel had it, and then S.H.I.E.L.D. got it back. So yeah, I don't find it contradictory. I mean, I saw some online material that suggested that Marvel was actually working with S.H.I.E.L.D., and S.H.I.E.L.D. gave her the Tesseract to work on Project Pegasus. If that's the case, how come Fury didn't know about this? Maybe he was too low on the totem pole, and that's why the high-ups were looking for the Tesseract, because they knew it disappeared after Marvel died, but he wasn't cleared enough. I mean, you could say it that way. And in fact, they call, and I don't remember if it was called this, but they referred to the S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to use the Tesseract to create weapons, as they did in the Avengers, which we saw at the start of the Avengers, that they call that Project Pegasus. So they're saying it's basically the same project. They just got a different... because Project Pegasus in this film was about Marvel trying to create these super fast engines with it, and it could be said she was doing that. Now, whether or not S.H.I.E.L.D. knew she was an alien or not, I don't know, but maybe she was using a cover, and she was using this cover to pretend to be making weapons for S.H.I.E.L.D. when really she was trying to make these engines to save the Skrulls. So, I don't know. I actually don't see any inconsistency there. But is it really necessary to throw it in there? No, it is not. But I don't think it fucks with continuity at all. But as far as... as far as how Nick Fury lost his eye, that's stupid. I'm sorry. I said that when I first saw this, and I'll say it again. That is fucking stupid that a cat scratches his eye out. Now, that's also inconsistent, because in Winter Soldier, Nick Fury said, the last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye. But there's workarounds for that. You could say that he was just lying, or he didn't really mean it, and because we see at the end of this movie that he's not outright lying, but he's sort of hinting to Coulson that it was the Skrulls that, or not the Skrulls, the Kree who tortured him and took out his eye. And so you could say that he was just going along with that cover story. So you could say it doesn't break canon, but it's still stupid. It's still dumb. And plus, when you have to say, oh, he lied, that's always a stupid way to cover it. It's obvious when they wrote a Winter Soldier that they were actually thinking of an actual interesting backstory where someone betrayed him and that's how he lost his eye. Not, oh, he's just lying to cover the fact that a cat scratched his eye out. That's stupid. Stupid. But I didn't mind the fact that the whole thing where it said Carol Danvers was the first Avenger was her call sign, and that's what gave Nick Fury the idea to call it the Avengers Project. That's fine. I don't mind that. I don't have an issue with that. As I said, 90s music, or the 90s nostalgia, I think was not enough. We needed more of it. We didn't have enough of it. Not enough. My opinion. Anyway, my rating for Captain Marvel out of 10, I think I'm going to give this an 8. An 8, extremely good. I think it was well structured. It was pretty interesting. Character stories were pretty tight and pretty strong. It was a story about Carol Danvers finding herself, recovering her memories and finding her powers and going out and kicking ass. Now, there were some silly things about it that didn't quite work. The whole thing with the Kree at the beginning, I wasn't completely on board with that. And some of the villains, like the young Rog and his team, whatever the hell they called, I didn't much care for them very much or think that they were very interesting. And, oh, look, there's Ronan the Accuser from Guardians of the Galaxy, the villain that sucked. Anyway, so, and of course they had this stupid thing with the cat and trying to match, that was ridiculous. It definitely brought the movie down a bit, but I think it's still a solid entry in the Marvel Universe. I think it is well put together with a more straightforward plot and character story that works better than most of the Phase 1 films. So, there you go. Really liked it. Okay, so now let me get into the film I've been waiting to talk about. This is the one I been waiting to watch again. I really wanted to watch again, and that is Avengers End Game. This will only be my second time watching this. I saw it, of course, the first day it came out, which was, at the time I'm recording this, I want to say 6 months ago. May, June, July, August, September, October. Yeah, 6 months ago. So it hasn't been that long. But I've only seen it once. So I'm really curious to see how I feel about it seeing it the second time, especially now that I've watched all the MCU in order. I do wonder if that's going to change because before I had seen some movies more recently than others, and I didn't really remember certain movies because it's been years since I've seen it, but now I've seen them all in order recently. So I wonder if that will affect my viewing of it. But when I first saw this movie, I proclaimed it the best MCU movie, and to my memory, I still think it is. So I'll be curious if I still feel that way after my second viewing. Because in my mind, as I said, I couldn't disagree more with people who thought Infinity War was better than Endgame. I thought Endgame was far superior. It didn't have any of the flaws that Infinity War had, and I love the fact that Thanos wasn't in it that much. First off, because I'm not a Thanos fan. And it was more of a character story. And a lot of people, what I heard, and I think this probably is a bit more slow-paced, character-based than most MCU movies, which is probably why I loved it. Because one of the complaints I heard a lot of people say about it is saying, oh, it's too slow, it's too boring, there's too many unnecessary... There is absolutely nothing unnecessary about this movie. Everything is completely necessary. I saw this movie in the theater with my mother, who it's 3 hours long, and she's like, there's no way I can sit through this without peeing. So she had went online to this website and found this thing that tells you all the right places to pee. They're like, so if when Ant-Man shows up in San Francisco, go pee. I'm like, what? How can you go? And I think she did then. I was like, you're missing this. It's that's the important thing for Ant-Man's story. It's the thing that drives the whole film, the plot for it is that he comes out of this thing for 5 years and he has to find a way to change the timeline. And you see this reunion with his daughter, which is so like powerful, especially after seeing the journey he had with his daughter in the first two Ant-Man films. But no, you go, and some of the others, I can't remember all of them, but one of the other things was in Tokyo with Hawkeye. I'm like, well, how can you go pee then? That's not gonna. It's important for Hawkeye's character. It shows how dark he's become. Like, I said, really, there's no place you can go. I think that thing was lying to you. It was telling you to go in all the good parts. There was one part that I would have gone to pee, and something that had to do with Black Widow and Captain America sitting around just talking and moving at the Avengers headquarters. Like, I would have went to pee there. I think that thing was wrong. But anyway, I think every moment of this film is like so. It is the perfect send off to this phase, or although the first three phases, if you want to say, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is the accumulation. It honors everything. Like so perfectly, and part of the reason is it does really, by having the snap, it is a cheat in order to condense the cast so it's not as freaking overbloated as it was in Infinity War, at least not until the very end of the film. But for the majority of the film, they keep it simple and keep it mostly to the basic. Most of the basic Avengers who were in the first Avengers movies. There's a few exceptions, Rocket Raccoon and Nebula and War Machine, but for the most part they keep it pretty basic. And Ant-Man, of course. But I think that's why it works as a character story so much. And there's so many strong character stories. And plus the fact that it's time travel. I love time travel movies, and I think this is one of the best uses of time travel ever. I think this movie is perfect. But anyway, let me go watch it again. So want to watch this movie again. And I'll get back to you and tell you if I still feel strongly about this afterwards. Alright, so Avengers End Game. Just came back from watching that, and yeah, I have to say, after seeing it for a second time, I like it even more. Not only am I willing to go as far as to say that this is easily the best film of the MCU, I would even go as far to say it's one of the best films of all time. I'm putting that out there, that this is one of my favorite movies of all time. It might make my top 10, my top 20, but to me, this is a great movie. This is a truly great movie, and I think it's the best sort of. It's not an ending because the MCU, of course, goes on, but it's the best ending for this first part of the MCU, for all the movies that came before. It's like everything accumulated into this movie. Now, and I like that. Now, some people will say that you can't view this as a standalone movie, that you have to look at it as like a season finale or a series finale of a TV show. And that's fine. I have no issue with that. And because a lot of the references and character stories and stuff are really dependent on everything, like the foreknowledge of everything that came before. And I do believe that I did get a lot. That's why I like this movie even more on the second viewing, because I had watched the entire MCU in order leading up to it. And I did think I do get a lot more out of it, having all of that still fresh in my mind. There's a lot of like little tiny details, like little lines of dialogue and stuff that's really dependent on, or callbacks to character relationships or events that happened in the previous MCU movies. And I actually love that about this movie, that it doesn't take the time to handhold audiences that haven't seen any of the films before or may not know everything that's going on. Now, some people criticize it for that. I actually love it for that. I think that's a very great, because they can just get right into the storytelling and right into the character stuff without wasting time trying to get people caught up on things that happened before. If you haven't seen all the movies that came before, your fault. But the thing is, like, you can understand this movie. Like, you don't need to see every single solitary movie in the MCU to understand this movie. Just like the key ones, like Infinity War, obviously, and maybe like Civil War or Iron Man. Just maybe you could get by on just a couple and still understand this movie just fine. You'd be miss all the references, but that's more of a deeper sort of understanding of the film. And I love that. I think, and this is epic. It is truly epic. It's like it takes you through this journey. It's 3 hours long, and it's like so much happens in this film. There are like stages of the film, and I think, and as I mentioned in my preamble, part of the reason why I may love this film so much is because I think it is one of the more character-based movies of the entire MCU, which I'm all about the character stories. And this was all about like wrapping up and resolving like all these lingering character stories with so many different characters, and I think it does such a damn good job at all of them. Now, I don't know. I know some people are going to disagree. I've heard some people complain about this movie, saying that because you just saw my review of Infinity War when I said there was tons of plot holes. And there's a lot of people who actually said that more about this film, but I honestly don't think this film has many plot holes, and the few that are there are insignificant that I don't give a shit about. Like, one that springs to mind is the how Hawkeye and Black Widow just happen to be the ones that go to Vormir. What if two people who didn't give a shit about each other went to Vormir? I guess they'd be shit out of luck. I mean, that's not really a plot hole. That's more of a contrivance, and I have ranted about contrivances in the past, but I'm fine with it. It's because it's not a huge issue. It's not like Zemo's plot or something that's way too convoluted or contrived to buy. It's just a little bit of writing, and it leads to great storytelling, so I give not a shit. I'm perfectly fine with it. But now, I guess I might as well take the time to jump into the time travel of it all. As I mentioned before, how I love time travel movies that are done right. They're my favorite. And I think this might be probably one of the best examples, best use of time travel logic. Now, I know some people might initially have a reaction to that, because I've heard a lot of people complain about the time travel logic in this film, but it actually is rock solid. It's one of the most best uses of time travel logic, and that's consistent. Like that Rian Johnson movie Looper is like one of the worst examples, because it's all over the place. Because here's the thing: there's lots of schools on time travel logic, and so it doesn't matter which school you go with, as long as you pick a lane and stick with it. You have to stick with the rules of time travel and the way it works. And Looper didn't. It chose 2 or 3 different ones, and it was all over the place. Arguably, Back to the Future does as well, but it's more of a lighthearted comedy, so I'm more willing to let that go. But mostly, Back to the Future stays in one. Looper kind of just everywhere. Avengers End Game absolutely sticks with one, and probably, as I said, I think is one of the most solid examples of time travel logic. Now, for those of you who were, what, the time travel is all over the place, didn't make any sense, well, frankly, just misunderstood it. Let me explain. So, there's 3 types of time travel in general. This is, I get from this channel Lore Runner that I watch. He named him, and so I'm sticking with this because it works. So there's type 1 time travel, which is whatever happened time travel. It's you can't change the past. If you go back in time and you do something, that's something had always happened. So, for example, we'll take the grandfather paradox, for example, which, if you don't know, the grandfather paradox is if you travel back in time and you kill your own grandfather, that means you never existed, so you were never able to travel back in time to kill your own grandfathers, therefore it's a paradox. So I'll use that in these 3 types. So first we'll plug that into type 1. In type 1, you can't kill your grandfather. There will be it would be impossible for you to do so, because you never did, because you're alive. So therefore, no matter how hard you tried, you would not be able to kill your grandfather. Something, the universe or whatever, something would stop you. You just couldn't. because in time travel, whatever happened. Movies like Time Crimes and 12 Monkeys and the new show Dark use this kind of time travel where things are always, so like with 12 Monkeys, they couldn't actually change anything about the past because, as Bruce Willis said, the past already happened. That's type 1. Type 2 time travel is the most popular use of time travel that's used in most time travel science fictions. I think actually the first Terminator used type 1 time travel, if I remember correctly, but Terminator 2 kind of switched to type 2 because they wanted to change things. But type 2 time travel is this: you have one timeline, and if you go back in time and you make changes, let's say the grandfather paradox, if you killed your own grandfather, then you wouldn't have existed. So it does create a paradox. Now, different uses of type 2 time travel have different ways of dealing with this paradox. Some would just say you're erased from existence, so like you kill your grandfather and you disappear. Some will say it creates like a paradox that destroys the world, the universe, because it couldn't possibly happen. But either way, it's a paradox. Because type 2 time travel is, you go back in time to the singular timeline, you make a change, that changes the future. It alters the one timeline. So if you go back to the future, if you go back to the future, you have to deal, your future is now changed. It's different because you had changed something in the past. So the future is now a different timeline. I've heard people say that Star Trek uses type 3, and I'll get to type 3 shortly, but it absolutely does not. It always uses type 2. Yesterday's Enterprise is a strong case of type 2 time travel because the Enterprise C changed the future by going into the future and not, destroying the Romulans, so that altered the one timeline. So Picard had to fix the one timeline by sending Enterprise C back, and that restored the future, the one timeline. and so most pieces of fiction, Back to the Future, probably all the ones they named in this movie, Hot Tub Time Machine, Star Trek, like all these things use type 2 time travel logic. Now, type 3 is the one that I can't think of many other examples. The only other example I can think of is Star Trek 2009, which they use type 3 time travel logic just as an excuse to reboot the show. But type 3 time travel logic is that if you travel back in time and you change something, you create an alternate timeline. It's a multiverse sort of thing, and that's where alternate universes come from. So, for example, if you just do the grandfather paradox, if you travel back in time, killed your own grandfather, then that's perfectly fine. You just create a different timeline where your grandfather is dead and you never existed. But the timeline where you came from still exists. So you can still exist even though your grandfather is dead. You just created another timeline where you don't exist. And that's what this film uses. That's what Avengers End Game uses type 3 time travel logic. And apparently, I'm not a huge comic book reader, but apparently this is the kind of time travel logic they typically used in the comics as well. And that's why you have comics like What If, and I'm so looking forward to that series, by the way, because all these different, every time someone time travels, it creates an alternate universe. Or, if they do something, I think if they do something significant enough to change the timeline. Now, so Star Trek 2009 is the only example I can think of. They kind of toyed with this idea in Lost and in Dark, but neither one has of yet. Of course, Lost is finished, so it never will. Actually fully went into, although Dark might, but I don't want to get into too much into that. That if you make a change significantly enough in the past, that it creates an alternate timeline. So and you punch it into this movie, it makes perfect sense. Everything fits. Like I've watched this one review where this one critic was like, "Oh, this time travel logic makes no sense because Nebula kills her past self. How can she kill her past self? So it's a paradox." No, it's not a paradox because that past Nebula is from an alternate reality. The Nebula that we know and love is from, well, but lack of better terms, it's called the prime reality, the prime timeline. And this other one is from a different timeline that was altered by this Nebula going back there and taking the Infinity Stones away. Therefore, the Nebula that she kills is a completely different Nebula. Is from a different reality. So the one that we know and love, her past is exactly the same as we experienced it before in Guardians of the Galaxy. Her past has not been altered because it can't have been altered because it already happened. It's just there's another reality where this Nebula is now dead and there's no Nebula. So, and I think they did a pretty clear job of explaining. The first scene when it was the Hulk talking to Ant-Man and War Machine, and they were making jokes about Hot Tub Time Machine. Hulk just says something like, "You can't change something in your past because it already happened." Like, that didn't really make much sense. I didn't really grasp what they were getting at until we get the scene with the Ancient One and Hulk. But she talks about it more in terms of the Infinity Stones. So I had heard some people think that it was only the Infinity Stones that created alternate realities, but I get the impression that it's not just. It's that if you go back in the past and you make a change, it creates a significant change, I should say, that it creates an alternate reality. And therefore, and that's why the Hulk went back, or Captain America went back and took all the Infinity Stones and put them right back in their places so that they wouldn't create an alternate reality, because the change wouldn't be significant because the stones would be back where they belong. But arguably, they did create an alternate reality, Captain America and Iron Man, when they set Loki free. So now there's going to be an alternate reality where Loki, after the first Avengers movie, Loki got the Tesseract and disappeared and ran away with the Tesseract, because that's not what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen, he's supposed to be taken back to Asgard. He's going to be in the prison, as we saw in the flashbacks to Dark World. And so it completely changes the events of what happened with Dark World and all that. And I think that exactly is what going to be explored in Loki's new TV show. Loki's getting a TV show on Disney Plus, and he's in the prime timeline. Loki's dead, but I'm sure the show is going to follow this alternate reality where Loki isn't dead, where he got away from the Avengers, and it will probably take off from there and show how events have changed and been very different because they changed the timeline. And so by changing the timeline, it creates an alternate reality. Now, the only wrinkle in this, when I first saw this movie, I thought it was the only flaw, but I'm now satisfied that it's not a flaw, although it is a bit of a stretch. But the only wrinkle in this is the ending, where we see Steve Rogers as an old man. Because and this is another thing a lot of people had issues with, but I actually don't, and I'll walk you through this too. So Steve Rogers, we see him show up as an old man because he went to return all the Infinity Stones. So apparently he stayed back in the past, and then once he was old enough, he just walked over to where Falcon and Bucky were. But the question you might ask is, well, if he's gone back to the past and gone with Peggy and never actually died, wouldn't that create an alternate timeline? And some other people who didn't grasp the alternate timeline scenario would be like, well, I don't buy that Steve Rogers would go back to the past and not do anything. He knows everything that's going to happen. He knows about Loki, New York, so he's just going to sit this out and do nothing and just let this stuff happen when he can stop it in advance. But here's the thing. It does create an alternate timeline. When Steve Rogers goes back and he decides to stay with Peggy and get married or whatever, and this is something that the directors, the Russo brothers, confirmed, that that when Captain America goes back, it creates an alternate timeline. So, some people speculated that Peggy Carter was married. It was mentioned she was married in Civil War, so some people speculate, hey, maybe that was actually Steve Rogers. But actually, no, it's not, because that didn't happen in this reality. There's another reality where that did happen, because when Steve Rogers traveled back to the past and stayed with Peggy, he created another reality where he stayed with her and they got to dance whenever. So, as far as the question as of why didn't Steve Rogers stop all this stuff in advance, maybe he did. We don't know. Maybe in this other reality, he did actually stop all this stuff from happening. And, he stopped looking and preemptively because he knew what was going to happen. Of course, the more changes he makes, the more different that reality would become. So it would eventually get to a point where he wouldn't know what was going to happen, because things butterfly effect would become more different, and so they wouldn't play out in this alternate reality the same way they played out in his reality, although I'm sure there's a few things he could have predicted. So maybe he did. We don't know. But as far as, if Steve Rogers was in an alternate reality, then how does he show up at the end to say goodbye to Bucky and Falcon? And again, the Russo brothers explained this in an interview. You might think, oh, well, that's bullshit. We shouldn't have to have things explained to us in an interview. It's not canon. It should be in the movie itself. I'm fine with this, because I think you could sort of come to this conclusion without the Russo brothers explaining to you. It's more of ambiguity. It's more of something that you need to put together. And some people did put this together without them saying. They just confirmed that it's the case. That Steve Rogers used the Pym particles to travel to the alternate reality. So he was in an alternate reality as an old man, so he didn't just walk up to where Falcon and Bucky were. He had to use the Pym particles to travel from his reality to the prime reality in order to meet up with the Bucky and Falcon that he knew, because that's the reality that he originally came from. So he was just visiting this reality. And maybe, I don't know if he ever returned to reality, because we have no details. We don't know if Peggy was still alive. Maybe because she probably died of natural causes at the same time she did in the prime reality, so she would probably be dead at this point as well. So maybe he just stayed in the prime reality and didn't bother going back, or maybe, I don't know. But the point is that he used the Pym particles to travel from his reality to the prime reality, and that's how he ended up. That's why he was able to show up there as an old man and say goodbye to Bucky and give the shield to Falcon. Because in his alternate reality, he probably wouldn't have befriended, he wouldn't have been involved with the Falcon and Bucky, because he was a family man. So the Falcon and Bucky that he knew were in the prime timeline, so he had to use the Pym particles to travel. So it all makes, to me, this is the tightest, one of the best uses of time travel out there. So I say, I'm sorry, don't mean to come off as condescending, but I say that anyone who says that time travel logic in this film didn't make sense didn't understand it. Honestly, I think this is probably some of the best use of time travel, and I love me some good time travel. And I think this is not only now getting past the logic part of it, but the use of it. Traveling back to the events of prior movies, you see them in New York in the first Avengers, you see them in Guardians of the Galaxy. I love that scene. It's so funny, by the way, when we see Quill from others' perspective, where he's just going, listening to the headphones, in War Machine. It's oh, he's an idiot. That was funny. And then you see Thor: The Dark World, which actually wasn't a very good movie, but it was so they use it so well to have Thor reconnect with his mother. Now, I don't want this review to go on forever, but I could get into all the details of all of these specific character stories that they resolve in such a great way. Thor is a great example. I love how they played off of his guilt ever not having to stop Thanos and how it was eating him up inside. I thought it was absolutely hilarious how he was in there playing video games with Korg. That was amazing. But his character journey of trying to come back from that space to being and by the end of the film, where he was once again the Thor that, again, the God of Thunder or whatever. That was a great character story. God, Iron Man's character story was absolutely amazing. The whole, again, this was such an epic film. It starts with him, having a kid, and because this is accumulation of his character story throughout the entire MCU. You definitely see that watching all these MCU movies, that he's facing his biggest fear. His biggest fear is to sacrifice himself, and that's what he ultimately does, and it's just such a powerful ending. And also, I got to talk about how much I love the structure of the film. Because I love the fact that they present the start of the film, they present it like, we're going to go get Thanos, it's going to go be a big battle against Thanos. And a lot of people expected this movie to be a battle against Thanos. And so when they show up there and they just kill Thanos right away, a lot of people were like, whoa, what? Was the movie over? It's only been going for 20 minutes. Where I was not expecting that. I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. And I was so glad. Well, you know me, I didn't like Thanos. So I was actually really glad they killed him off right away. And that the movie wasn't really about him. It was kind of like when they brought him back, I was like, oh no, they're bringing him back. But the way they used him, I was actually perfectly fine with. So I had no issues with that. I loved how, that moment where after they killed him and it just fades to black and it stays on black for a few seconds, and then you see 5 years later. That was probably, I'm calling it the most powerful time card ever in cinema. That each of those words hit you like a gut punch. 5 years later. And it was just so powerful, where you see Captain America in these focus groups with everyone dealing with half of the world's population disappearing for 5 years. And I called this the leftovers on steroids, because the leftovers, only 2% of the world's population disappeared. This is 50%. And how the world, they imply there's not baseball anymore. There's not the infrastructure to support all the things that they used to have, because half of the world's population vanished. And so it was so powerful seeing the fallout of them dealing, and that scene. And again, Steve Rogers and Tony Stark's character story, because they've been through this whole journey of being at odds with each other, and the film starts out by because this is the first time they've really seen each other since Civil War, and how those feelings, how Tony Stark has this feeling of resentment that's kind of his fault, and Cap's fault, for letting Thanos win, for letting this happen, and to see them come together, and by towards the end of the movie, where they're actually teaming up and they're shaking hands and they're traveling back in the 70s together to get this done. That was a great, there's so many things, there's so many character stories in this film that works so well. There was such a great send-off, such a great conclusion that honors everything that came before. It would literally take me over an hour to get into all of them. So I'm not going to get into all of them, unfortunately, because it would take so long. But I got to talk about Steve Rogers' ending, because I actually, watching the MCU in order, I think that was a beautiful ending. It had me crying. I think that's the best possible ending they could have had for Steve Rogers, because you watch the first Avenger, you see how upset he was, how in love he was with Peggy Carter, and how much it's always been. And they even played throughout each of his movies, Winter Soldier, Civil War, this one. They play about how it still saddens him. It's still a really deep, dark place in his life that he never got to be with her. And so for him, in that moment we got in the 70s where he sees her, I think that's when he first decides that I need to spend my life with her. And so it's so powerful at the end of the film when he does. It's a perfect character arc for him. And but I do have to talk really quickly about Hawkeye and Black Widow, because I really wanted to mention that when they go to Vormir, because I heard some people, in fact I heard one critic specifically say that they thought the scene was not as powerful as the one in Vormir or in Infinity War when Thanos threw Gamora off the cliff, which, boy howdy, I feel the exact opposite. I could not disagree with more. I think this is way more powerful, because Thanos, as I talked about in Infinity War, I didn't really identify with this character. I didn't really care that he was sad that he killed his daughter. His whole quest to find the stones I thought was a bit out there, so I just couldn't get on board with the scene, so it didn't really have an emotional impact. Where here, you had two characters that, even though neither of the one got their own independent film yet, you got the relationship, you understood how close they were and how much they've been through, and for them to, and even when they first show up, they're just kind of joking around and stuff until they realize that this shit is real, and to see each of them trying to sacrifice the other and actually fighting each other over who gets to sacrifice themselves to save the world, like, that was so powerful. And when Black Widow was the one that died, like, that was probably one of the deaths that affected me the most in this film, because I really didn't see that coming. I kind of knew that because Robert Downey Jr. didn't want to really do Marvel movie. I kind of knew that Tony Stark might die, and Steve Rogers leaving. I kind of knew that Chris Evans didn't want to do it anymore, so it wasn't shocked. Black Widow dying, that shocked me, and it was such a powerful scene. I think it is one of the most so much. Like I said, it would take me forever to get into how much this movie works, how powerful all the conclusions are, and definitely how much better the film is if you watch it in context after watching all the other MCU. One little quick shout out that I liked that I didn't catch the first time was when Wasp shows up at the very end of the film, and you're going to try to get to the time machine to take the stones back, and the Wasp, like, on the radio says, "We're on it, Cap," and smiles at Ant-Man. After watching Ant-Man and Wasp again, I finally got that she was making fun of Ant-Man for calling Captain America Cap. He's like, Cap? But here she calls him Cap. And it's those little, and there's so many of them sprinkled throughout the film. Now, I do have to talk about this third act, because this is probably one of the most outrageous, like, over the top, most violent, most CGI third acts in the entire MCU, and it's the best one. It is the best third act, hands down. Like, this, it was so perfect. It was so amazing having basically all the characters come back, and to see Captain America say Avengers Assemble for the first time. I'm sorry. Some people call it fan service. I think that's a misuse of the term, because I think fan service is an inherently negative term. I think this is, I don't know how else I would describe it differently, as payoffs, as earned payoffs that satisfy fans. Fan satisfaction, maybe I'd call it that. But it was just, and that whole fight sequence, which was very long and drawn out, was totally intense. Unlike the ones in Infinity War, which I said I wasn't really involved with because there wasn't any real stakes involved, and Thanos is seen as too invincible. Here, Thanos wasn't seen as too invincible. Here, the stakes felt, and because there was, like, evenly matched, the stakes felt real, and so every time something happened, and all the individual fights, and Spider-Man trying to get away with the thing, like, I was so invested throughout. This is definitely, it was the most action-packed, most suspenseful, most engaging third act fight sequence. As I said, it's a perfect send-off to the MCU. Like, everything about this movie was amazing. And then when Iron Man, when he gets the glove, and Thanos thinks he has the stones, so he says, "I am inevitable," and nothing happens, and then you see Iron Man have the stones, and he draws the moment out, and he says, "And I am Iron Man." Like, I'd had me in tears, I had to say, when I just watched that. That moment was so beautiful, so well earned, and as I said, it ties into Tony's character arc, which was played out perfectly in this movie, how he's willing to sacrifice. And then we get the funeral where we see his daughter, like, saying, he says, "I love you 3,000" to her, which again had me in tears. Like, this movie was so moving. It was so well earned. Everything about it just worked. there's like maybe a couple of like really loose flaws that I can maybe think of, that maybe some things happen to get it in place, but they're so minor and insignificant, I don't care. This movie, I mean, the good so overwhelmingly outshines the bad in this film. I think this is, I'm going to say, I think this is one of the best films of all time. I honestly do. I think this is a near perfect movie. So my rating for Avengers End Game out of 10, of course, is a 10. The best. This movie, I think, is really close to a masterpiece. I will say this is pretty much the best kind of superhero movie you can have. I think it's definitely the best conclusion to this like 22 movie story arc that you could have, that surfaces each and every character in such an amazing way, has so many emotional endings, so many emotional conclusions, and of course it's definitely the most powerful story told in the MCU about how they deal with a huge loss. And I think, to me, showing how they deal with a huge loss and how they overcome it and the amazing heights they have to go through is a lot more interesting than seeing the huge loss itself. So I think this movie is quite amazing. Anyway, I could go on and on about Endgame, but I don't want to be here all day. So let me go ahead and move on to our last movie, most recent movie to come out, so the last MCU movie to come out, so the last movie I'll cover in these videos, Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, as I said, like, Endgame would have been the perfect ending for Phase 4, or Phase 3, sorry. And I think the Marvel's Kevin Feige, they wanted it to end with Endgame, but Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man, and they're like, nah, screw you. We want to make money now. We don't want to wait. So they forcibly said, nah, screw this. We're releasing Spider-Man Far From Home this year. Nothing you can do about it. So MCU had to just roll with the punches. Be like, all right, fine. So I think that's the only reason why it's considered part of Phase 3. Because really it would have been a good start for Phase 4. The start of Phase 4 with Black Widow, which is a prequel, so that makes less sense to start the next phase with the prequel, but whatever. Because this deals with the aftermath of Endgame and Infinity War. And so, but I think, I think rather, they could have just called it Phase 4, but it came out like 2 or 3 months after Endgame, so that would have been a bit silly. They want to have a huge break, like a year-long break in between, which is what they're doing, because it is going to be at least a year after Spider-Man Far From Home before we get the next movie. I think so, anyway. But anyway, Spider-Man Far From Home, as I said, I just saw this a couple months ago, so I'm going to see it again for the second time. I remember it being a decent movie. I remember liking it. Maybe almost as much as Homecoming, but not quite as much, because as I talked about in my Homecoming review, this movie doesn't have Michael Keaton in the car being all creepy. So therefore, it's automatically inferior. But Mysterio is a villain that was always my favorite Spider-Man villain from the comics. It's one I was so young when I read the comics, I don't remember much about them, but what I do remember is Mysterio being one of my favorite villains. And so throughout the decades when all these Spider-Man movies are coming out, I'm always like, well, when's Mysterio gonna pop up? I want to see Mysterio. I'm sick of seeing... And this had like villains like Electro and this Lizard, whatever, who I never heard of before. I'm like, why are you doing that bullshit and you're not doing Mysterio? Come on, what's wrong with you? And now they finally, when I heard they were doing Mysterio and that Jake Gyllenhaal was going to play him, I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. And it was. It was amazing. This was actually, I loved to death what they did with Mysterio in this film. And I love how it actually ties into the MCU. So I do remember thinking very kindly of this film and liking it a lot, but I'm not sure how much. So let me go watch it again. I'll come back and give some thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. Alright, so just came back from watching Spider-Man Far From Home, and yeah, it's a pretty good film. I did enjoy it. It was a fun little romp. I do have to say I do prefer Homecoming, but Far From Home was still good. As I said, I like Mysterio as the villain. I love Jake Gyllenhaal in this role. He's remind me a lot of when he played in Nightcrawler, where he would play the sociopath. So he does that. That sort of evil, because usually he actually plays a nice guy or a good guy, but he actually does that like creepy, evil, deceptive person very well. And I didn't mind the fact that a lot of people were harping on the fact that the first half of the film they try to present it as if he's a nice guy, and in fact before the movie came out they were like trying to be hush about trying to keep the secret that he was the villain of the film. But anyone who knew anything about the comics knew he was a villain. In fact, like years before, when it was first announced that Jake Gyllenhaal would be in the next Spider-Man movie, they said, "Oh, Jake Gyllenhaal's playing Mysterio, the new villain in the next Spider-Man movie." I mean, of course, it's the villain; it's Mysterio. But that didn't bother me. I was kind of silly to keep it under wraps, but I guess those who aren't familiar with the comics don't know who Mysterio is might have been surprised by it, so that's fine if you want to keep it under wraps for those uninitiated. I see no issue with that. So I didn't really have a problem with the fact that they had it as a twist, a reveal, even though for anyone with any familiarity with Spider-Man knew that this was coming. Of course. I mean, I heard the argument that because he was saying he's from another reality, that maybe, in this reality, Mysterio is good. But no. Actually, I love the fact that they play off of the fact that how crazy the universe is in the MCU, that all this crazy shit happens, and so that people will believe anything. I mean, that's true. That does leave a spot open for a con artist, which is basically who this character was. He was a con artist, and using this advanced technology that we know exists in this world, and they can create these over-the-top crazy stories, and people will believe them because over-the-top crazy shit actually happens in this universe. And so he just took advantage of that. And of course the other thing about the established universe it plays off of is that being heroes have like all the power, all the prestige. I mean, it's kind of like that show The Boys, although The Boys went to a much, much darker place with this, and all the superheroes themselves were the ones who were like corrupted, and the whole system was corrupt by it, where that's not how it's presented here, where the superheroes are corrupt and the whole system's corrupt. But it does show that the superheroes are the ones with all the prestige and the power, so it makes sense you would have people who are twisted trying to get in on this action. And of course they make it clear that he's not a good guy, because he is willing to kill hundreds or thousands of people in London just to make his point. Like, he's creating the villain himself, of course, and the villain is killing all these people, and he doesn't care as long as he looks like the hero. So he's obviously the bad guy. Also, I love, like, of course, it plays Mysterio the way he played in the comics, where he would do all these weird illusions and shit, which of course was his trademark. And I find the scenes, even though I find it a bit hard to believe he was managed to do all that with just drones, it was still, the scenes when Spider-Man was trapped in his illusions was still really trippy. Great cinematography, great editing and all that, and special effects, and it looked amazing, and it was a really cool cinematic experience. So I did really love that. I love the scene when Peter Parker gives Mysterio the glasses, and he walks out, and you find this all illusion. He does the cheering, the toast. Now, I've heard some people complain that scene was a bit too obvious exposition. It was like a superhero ranting and giving his evil plan so the audience will understand. But I didn't actually think of that until the critic pointed out, and I actually disagree, because to me this came off pretty seamlessly. Actually, I thought it was a quite ingenious way to slip in exposition where it feels natural, because it feels natural that he would want to toast, and a toast to you for doing this and a toast for you for doing that, even though really he's pointing out all the specific things that they're doing for the audience. But it didn't come off as like a villain monologuing evil plan at all. It came off as a natural, like, yes, they would want to celebrate and toast, and it seemed really true to his character that that's the kind of thing that he would do. And I find it interesting. I thought, from memory, I thought it was just more than one person who appeared in a previous movie that was in his gang, but actually it was only one. The dude who got yelled at by, what's his name, Obadiah Stane, or whatever his name is in the first Iron Man movie, when it says, Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave! and this showed a clip of him from that. But everyone else, actually, they just say used to work for Tony Stark or has a grudge against Tony Stark. That was the only one who actually appeared in the previous film. So it was a really cool Easter egg, though, that they plucked that tiny, because I just watched Iron Man, as you know, not too long ago, and in fact I knew that he would reappear, so I was keeping an eye on him, and he barely appeared in that movie. So it was very interesting that, and he was like only in 2 scenes, I think, but so very interesting that they brought this very minor, and I think that goes along with the character of Mysterio, that they're having like all the minor characters, the people in the background who or lower positions who have a grudge against Tony Stark and people with power, and they're coming together. That's why I thought that they had more minor characters than just him, but oh well, that's fine. So, downsides of the movie is I do think it did take a while to get going. I think I enjoyed the character interactions and the teenage, like high school stuff in Homecoming a lot more than I did here. Here, for the first part of the opening of the scene, I wasn't that into it. I didn't like Ned as much in this film. I don't know. I just found his Dave romance. And it's like, oh, I'm in love, and at the end they're like, oh, we broke up, and oh, I'm an adult now, and blah blah. I just found that a bit too over the top. Like, I didn't totally hate it, but I think I did like him much better in the first film. He felt more natural, more like a natural friendship with Peter, where here it seemed a bit telegraphed for comedy. So I didn't like it quite as much. I don't really see why they're including Flash Thompson as much as they are. He's not really that interesting, and I don't really get what they're trying to do with this character. Are they trying to... Because I kind of sympathize with him, that things always fuck up on him now, and are we supposed to laugh at his... I don't know. I just don't connect with that. And, of course, the thing that probably irritated me the most was the teachers. Like, I did not like them at all. I'm sorry. It's particularly that scene with the guy who was setting up the camera on the thing and it fell. And, oh, no, is it going to fall in the water? It falls in the water. Like, that's so dumb. I really don't care. And I don't buy these as real teachers. Like, in the first movie, they had that same teacher, and he was fine in Homecoming. He felt like a real teacher, even though he was a bit dorky. But here they take it over the top, and having the 2 teachers, and then they're acting like total morons. And the guy keeps saying, "Oh, it's witches." Like, I would say they're trying too hard with the comedy in this film, whereas the Homecoming it felt more natural. But yeah, and the teachers like throughout the film really annoyed me, to be perfectly honest. But once the plot with the Mysterio guy going, that's when it got really interesting, and I did really enjoy that aspect of the film a lot. And I like the character journey, of course, that Peter goes through about having, it's very poignant. It deals with the aftermath of Endgame, about him having to deal with Tony Stark's death, and everyone thinking that he's going to be the next Iron Man, and him not wanting it, and so he thinks that he's not worthy, and he gives the glasses to Mysterio, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, and he realizes his mistake, and that he needs to believe in himself more. I think that was a really good character story. that worked well for the film. And I liked the thing with the blip, how they try to explain the events of Endgame. And I don't mind that they do it in a bit of a comedic way. I think that's fine because I don't think they go over the top with it. I think that they talk about how weird it is that he's that people that he knew were 5 years younger are now their age. And that is really weird. And also Aunt May's having to deal with, people who are displaced by the blip. That also, I didn't talk about this in Endgame, but that's probably the one flaw I had with Endgame the most, is the fact that I said this initially, that I wish they would have just went back in time and made so those people never disappeared, but of course, the way they established time travel, they couldn't do that, because that would just be creating another reality, and their reality where everyone was dead would still exist. So, they had to do it that way, but it creates issues because there would be, what if they, spouses, someone's lost their wife but they remarried and the wife pops up again? Awkward. I mean, that's going to happen a lot. And I've heard people say, what if someone were traveling in an airplane, would they reappear in midair? But, I think someone involved with the movies were saying no, because the Incredible Hulk snapped everyone back into existence, and therefore his intentions were good, so they would be someplace safe. If they were in midair when they disappeared, they would reappear on the ground somewhere safe. But what if when Thanos snapped his fingers and all these people disappeared, you even saw in that scene with Nick Fury, the helicopter crashed. So what if they were on a commercial airline and the pilots disappeared and the plane crashed and everyone died? And what about them? They remain dead because they're screwed? I don't know, that seems like they could make a storyline about someone like that who's pissed off at the Avengers because they saved everyone who blipped, but not everyone who died because of the blip. I don't know. I'm going off on a little tangent here, but I do think there's a lot of flaws with the blip. I guess that's my biggest issue. I should have mentioned this in Endgame. That's probably my biggest issue, but of course it's not enough for me to not love that film as much as I do. I still do. But I do love that they sort of addressed some of that here. They addressed that people were displaced by the blip. And this does take place 8 months after, so it... not immediately after, so I do like that as well. But I wish they would have got more, and I guess this would have went against the comedic tone, but I wish they would have got more into the trauma the people who didn't blip went through, because people were joking, oh, I didn't blip, now my brother, is older than me, or whatever. The people who didn't blip, that must have been, as we saw in Endgame, really traumatic for them. And so for all those people to reappear, it couldn't just go back to everything's normal. They would still live with those 5 years of having to live in this world that was didn't have the infrastructure because half the people were gone, and so that would take a toll on their psyche, and that was not addressed at all. So hopefully they will address this in a future film. It does make the whole universe really extremely fantastical. But as I said, that sort of plays to the storyline in this film about how Mysterio is able to take advantage of that, because after what just happened to Thanos, anything could seem believable. But, yeah. But I did like the storyline with Peter Parker and MJ. I like MJ as a character. I've heard other people who didn't. I completely disagree. Maybe because she reminds me of my high school crush who was all into dark shit like that. But I thought it was really cool, and I liked their little romance. I thought it was cute, and I thought it played well. They had good chemistry together. And in fact, I really liked Zendaya in this role. I think she was one of the highlights of the film. And I do like that she found out that Peter was Spider-Man. And I love the ending when she's flying around with him. That was absolutely great. That was an amazing payoff. Now, getting back to some of the downsides, I will say that the third act did go on for a bit too long. I will admit, it was intense at first, and I was really invested in him, taking down Mysterio and exposing him for the fraud that he is. But they prolonged it a bit long, where I was starting to get a bit bored with it, frankly. But not that it was horrible. Like, it wasn't definitely by any means. It was not one of the worst third acts of the MCU, but it wouldn't be one of the better ones either. They could have picked up the pace a little bit. Now, as for the post-credit scenes, I didn't really care for it, to be honest. The first one. The second one's fine, but the first one, when they have that, the thing that Mysterio actually, they planted the tape and they showed the guy, and he altered the evidence to make it look like Peter Parker killed him. I'm just kind of, and then they had what's his face, Jameson, come on, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's what's the dude's name from Oz?" Hold on, I gotta look up his name now. J.K. Simmons, of course, who of course played Jameson in the other Spider-Man films. It is weird that they have the same actor from a different version of Spider-Man, because it's this is a reboot. But I guess he played that character so well, it makes sense that they bring him back, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, they brought him back! Oh, it's so amazing!" And he's good as a character. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't go crazy over it. I didn't, my mind didn't explode like some people were like, like it was the best thing ever that happened to him their whole lives. And I was like, calm down. He's good in that role, but whatever. I'm just sick of this storyline that it seems we get it so much in superhero movies. I don't know if the MCU did it that much. It did a little bit with Civil War and stuff. But the storyline where the superhero is made to look like the villain, and everyone thinks he's a villain, and everyone hates him, and even though they're doing good, it shows that how fucked up the world. I mean, this is actually more of a Marvel thing, to be honest. Marvel does this a lot. But I've just seen this too much recently in movies and shows, and I'm sick of it. And so I didn't really care for the fact that everyone thinks Spider-Man's evil now. The bigger thing, I don't mind them revealing that it's Peter Parker. I think some really interesting stuff can come from that. So it depends on how they handle it. If they sort of downplay the everyone thinks he's evil, and they sort of just play it off as if like immediately in the next Spider-Man film they expose that the Jameson, whatever his face is was a fraud, and they have evidence to prove that he's fine. Like immediately, oh, it's fine. Everyone, then I would prefer they do that. But they deal with the after fallout with everyone knowing Peter Parker is Spider-Man, because that to me is more interesting. That everyone thinks he's a villain. I don't really want that again. I'm sorry. I'm just kind of sick of that. And also, it's kind of shitty to leave that as a it's such a huge cliffhanger in the post-credit scene. And so, who knows when we're going to get the next Spider-Man movie. But we will get another one. For a while there, it was looking like we wouldn't get one in the MCU, and that would probably, they could still play off this cliffhanger, I suppose, but that would totally fuck everything. So at least we're getting another Spider-Man in the MCU movie. Whew, thank God. And maybe they can end this one a bit more definitively, just in case the deal with Sony actually does fall through. But anyway, the other post-credit scene with the Skrulls, that was cool. I like how they played back to Captain Marvel, of course, which just came out. Of course, the Skrulls, Captain Marvel took place in the 90s, so what the hell are the Skrulls up to for all this time? Why are they just popping up now after 20 plus years? Hopefully that will be explained in the future. And of course it leaves a big cliffhanger to what is Nick Fury doing in the spaceship with all these Skrulls. I don't know what movie that's going to play into, and where the Avengers are. I do like how, and earlier in the movie, when Spider-Man is like, oh, what about the Avengers? What about Thor? And he says, what about Captain Marvel? And Nick Fury is like, don't invoke her name. Which to me, it didn't make sense when I first saw it, but then when you go back and think, it's actually the Skrull who he's talking to, and not the real Nick Fury. It kind of makes, because he was involved with Captain Marvel and stuff. And well, they ended up being friends in the end, but he had some bad experiences with her at first. But that was kind of cool. So my rating for Spider-Man Far From Home out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Yeah, really, I enjoyed this film. I love the stuff with Mysterio. I love they take advantage of the universe and the world. I love the romance with Peter and Zendaya, or MJ. I thought it was really well done. I thought these two characters had good chemistry, and it was good seeing them like swinging the ropes. And I like the character story for Peter Parker, but I didn't like the comedy in it as much. All the high school stuff at the start I thought wasn't as good. I didn't like what they did with Ned and his girlfriend. It was a bit annoying, and I didn't like what they did. And some of the jokes with Happy towards the end were a bit silly as well. So it didn't quite work as well for me as Homecoming. But it's still a good movie. Still very strong entry. It's still... is definitely my second favorite Spider-Man movie ever of all time. I'm still loving Tom Holland's Spider-Man way more than any other iteration, like way more than any other iteration of Spider-Man, and it being a part of the MCU does actually help a lot. So I'm glad that will continue. So, that is it. I have now covered all of the MCU movies that have been released up to this date. Of course, if you're watching this in the future after more MCU movies has been released, this is an older video, that's why I won't cover anymore. But hopefully I will cover those movies as they come out on my channel. So you can be sure to subscribe to keep an eye out for that. So, this isn't the end of my MCU coverage, however, as next month I will be ranking all of the MCU movies in order from my least favorite to my favorites, all 23 of them, put them in my order. And, you know, I did this, a similar video, it was before Endgame and Captain Marvel came out, and Far From Home. I did this with a couple other YouTubers, Don Willie, Darren, and Josh from Geeksiders, and we made our own collective, like we each took turns, or we averaged out our ratings, and we came up with something that was really that none of us agreed on. Well, some of us mostly agreed on it, but this time it's going to be this guy here, so you can disagree with me a lot more. It would just be my flat out opinion, so the correct answer, just my opinion, and of what the worst and to the best. And of course I do have a feeling, like if you watch these series you probably have some idea of what my list is going to be. You know that Civil War is not going to be at the top, and that Endgame is not going to be at the bottom. And you know that Endgame is going to be higher than Infinity War and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll get into more specifics of the correct ranking of the MCU film. So that's coming out next month. And as I promised in the previous video, I actually am going to I'm going to rank all the villains of the MCU, which will be fun. I'll do that, of course, in 2 months. Next month I'll do the ranking of all the movies, and then next month I'll do the ranking of the villains. So be sure to check that out, and check out my channel as I do many other reviews on other shows like Mr. Robot, The Expanse, Lost, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.